Well, despite his, I would argue, disastrous mismanagement of the pandemic and the failing health system in Victoria, last night Daniel Andrews secured an historic third term in power. Joining us now to discuss the results is the Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, John Roskam. Great to see you, John. What did you make of last night? You're there in the belly of it. You're in the heartbeat of it. What did you make of it?
Well, Victorians have 4 more years of suffering. There's a couple of things to note. This result was not surprising.
Yes.
It was predicted by the polls some 6 months ago. The Liberals have been hopeless for 10 years here in Victoria. Every election since the loss of Jeff Kennett in 1999, the Liberals have drifted to the left. And James a little earlier put his finger on it, which was that it wasn't that the Libs didn't have policies at this election. The Victorian Liberals had a lot of policies and most of them copied Labor or were more extreme than Labor. You have a Liberal Party leadership that is completely out of touch with branch members. I've had dozens and dozens of texts and emails since last night saying that branch members have never been more disenfranchised. The leadership is out of touch. Matthew Guy surrounded himself with a small coterie of left-leaning MPs, and we got the result that was entirely predictable some months ago.
James?
John, you're exactly right there, and you're saying something that I have heard from a lot of people too. I have these same conversations with people who are in the Liberal Party, and they don't know why they're in the party, anymore if they're going to get treated like this and ignored. Short of announcing they were going to turn St. Mary's Cathedral into a gender affirmation clinic, you could not have gotten a more left-wing platform than what Matt Guy offered. Is there a systemic problem with the Liberals, not just Victoria-wide, but also in New South Wales, nationally, that it is not an amenable place for anybody with values that are beyond the squishiest of careerist, moderate, soft left liberalism to get ahead in the system?
Well, James, you have just described the beliefs of too many federal and state Liberal MPs here in Victoria, and this has been noted by a number of people. Dan Andrews has basically waged a campaign against people of faith, particularly Christians. Matthew Guy and the Liberal leadership did his very best to basically say that Liberals don't welcome Christians, people of mainstream Christian faith. And as Rita identified, those voters Christian voters are going to the minor parties. As I said, you have a Liberal leadership that is completely out of touch with the people who they expect to donate money, the people who they expect to hand out how to vote cards. You have a Liberal leadership that is obsessed by what The Age and the ABC down here in Melbourne says. And you have Liberals who, as soon as last night, were saying the Liberal Party has to go even more left-wing. You have a Deputy Federal Leader, Susan Ley, who says the path to power back is through the teal seats. Well, that isn't happening. Voting is still continuing in Kew and Hawthorn, but if the Liberals hold Kew and gain Hawthorn back, it'll be by the narrowest of margin. Where the Liberals did well, almost despite themselves, was in the north and the west with the workers. These people have been ignored by Labor, ignored by the Liberals, because Liberals are not comfortable going anywhere north of Toorak. And there were big, big swings. This is the future of the Liberal Party. If if yesterday decided anything, it is that the future of the Liberal Party is not with wealthy people, educated people who can be locked down, who can pay more for heating, who don't care about the price of filling up their car with petrol. And Rowan, you were right. Peter Dutton should be very, very concerned. On last night's outcomes, the federal Liberals could lose more seats in Victoria, and you will have Anthony Albanese going to a referendum maybe in 12 months. He'll try and call an election straight after that, and the Liberals will go even further backwards if Peter Dutton doesn't start to stand for something.
Well, we're seeing this trend, John, not just in Australia but in the UK. We've seen it in the US, where what were traditionally affluent Conservative voters are very much voting left, and that working middle class, the aspirational voters, are now voting centre-right. But the Liberals in this country, and certainly in Victoria, don't seem to recognise that trend, because as you said, despite the fact that they had double-digit swings towards them in the northern and western suburbs, they did so little to appeal to those voters and what matters to them. They pre-selected mediocre candidates in so many of those seats, and they really didn't come up with policy positions about cost of living, about the things that matter to the ordinary people in those suburbs. It's all about this focus of the inner city.
Rita, that's exactly right. One of the very worrying trends of last night is that the Liberal heartland, not the wealthy seats, but the middle-class outer eastern seats, swung towards Labor. Now, the Liberal Party said nothing about education, a major issue to mums. When the Liberal Party talks about we need to speak to women, what about talking about Victoria's failing education system, the sexualisation of children, the indoctrination of young people to hate the country they're living in? The Liberals said nothing about education, for example. So the other thing, and Rita, you put your finger on this, Ron DeSantis in Florida tried to change people's minds. The Liberals have stopped trying to change people's minds. As Jordan Peterson just said, the Liberals poll people, they ask what they want to hear, and they simply reflect that. The Liberals have not tried to change minds. They have not tried to lead. They have not tried to explain that our debt in Victoria is worse than the combined debt of New South Wales and Queensland. The Liberals are afraid of their own shadow. Dan Andrews is an accomplished politician. He completely intimidated Matthew Guy. He completely intimidated the shadow cabinet. The Liberals were afraid of upsetting Twitter. Their policies did not reflect mainstream Liberal values, or I would argue mainstream Australian values, and Victorians were not given a choice last night.
John, I'm going to play you a little clip at one of the booths yesterday. It wasn't so much a sausage sizzle, it was oysters and champagne sizzle. This might back up your point about whether inner city Melbourne is in touch with the needs of aspirational Melbourne. So just have a quick look at this.
There are gourmet sausage rolls and oysters, Prosecco and champagne. Parents Sarah and Chris came up with the idea.
So we had the idea of doing some gourmet food like oysters and champagne because we live in a suburb where a lot of people quite wealthy who live here. In fact, it's either the first or second highest earning suburb in Victoria.
I mean, that's pretty amusing, John, but less amusing was Sally Capp, Lord Mayor Sally Capp, saying that COVID actually led to the people of Melbourne imagining a better and bolder and braver place. Well, they might imagine it. I'm not sure they've actually created it. But try telling that to the people in the outer suburbs who are locked down, who lost their businesses, lost their livelihoods, couldn't see their loved ones, got thrown to the ground, dragged out of cars by police officers, arrested in their pyjamas, throttled by over-exuberant Victorian police. Try telling them that COVID led to them imagining a better and bolder and braver Victoria. Was there any impact? Was there any impact in the vote from the COVID lockdown years?
Well, there was in the West. The people who weren't allowed to work. Victoria has the fastest growing public service in the country, the best paid, the fastest growing salaries, and people outside of Victoria need to understand that this has been a program of Dan Andrews and the Labor government to increase the size of the public sector, to increase the size of the population reliant on the public purse, who are very happy to be locked down. And these votes that the Liberals have lost in the inner city are not coming back. It will take many years for the Liberal Party to reorient itself towards people who work for a living, who have their own small businesses, who don't have the mansions in Malvern and Toorak where children can be home educated, allegedly. And what we saw from Sally Capp as Lord Mayor, well, of course she should resign. But again, it represents a view of so many of Victoria's political, cultural and business elite.
Sally Capp
verging
is
on a one-party state in a form, and Sally Capp represented that.
Well, Sally Capp is supposedly the Liberal on council, isn't she? That's kind of, you know, how she was sort of supposed to be the sensible centrist on council. What next for the coalition in Victoria? Surely Matthew Guy can't remain in that position. Do they go with another small L inner city type like a Pseudo, or do they go to some new blood? They've got some decent talent emerging there who are now going to be entering their second term. What do you think is going to happen next?
Look, Matthew Guy should stand down. He's had 2 chances. He has led the Liberal Party to disastrous losses. And these are not losses where we lost fighting for something that we believe in.
Exactly.
They're losses where we were pale imitations of the Labor Party. And voters know most Liberal MPs don't believe in their policies. So there's no reason why they should be voted for. John Pseudo is a good friend. I think he'd make an excellent leader. But more fundamental than the leader is the shadow cabinet. There are too many MPs who rather would be at least in the Teal Party, who make Matt Keane look like Ronald Reagan. Wholesale renewal of the branches. The branch membership has been completely locked out, and there have to be some Liberals who, at least if they lose, stand for something. And so many Liberal MPs have no understanding that Liberal voters, whether they're Liberal Party members or not, and I've been a member for 30 years, would rather die on their feet.
But John...
And we've got 4 years of difficulty in Victoria.
But John, I mean, you stand for something in the party and you get kicked out. I mean,
exactly.
look at Bernie Finn. So you've got that. But let's take this forward, not just to the future of the Liberal Party. I mean, Victoria has got all this debt. It's got an energy crisis coming. It's going to have a huge cost of living crisis coming. Is it going to take some sort of real serious economic crisis to shift the minds of voters to say, you know what, this simply isn't working anymore, just in the same way that it has, in the United States, in Europe, and places like that?
That's right, James. And the lockdowns were funded by debt. And both parties were afraid to talk about debt. It is worse now in Victoria in a financial situation than Victoria was in the 90s. And the panel talked about this. How Victoria goes is how Australia goes. So I get lots of sympathy from people outside of Melbourne, outside of Victoria. But I say, why do you think Dan Andrews is unique to Victoria? Australia is on the verge of a debt crisis. We have a failing education system. We have a culture that is, as I said, getting young people to disdain every aspect of Western civilisation and that has given them their freedom. Dan Andrews is uniquely Victorian. He is an accomplished politician, as I said. But don't think that what's happened in Victoria can't happen to this country.
Absolutely, John Roskam. And later in the show, we've got Bella de Brera from your IPA organisation. I urge people, go to ipa.org.au. The great work that John Roskam, Bella de Brera and many, many others do. Very, very important to listen to your work and to your words. So Bella later in the show. Thanks, John, so much for giving us your insights this morning. The one which will always stay with me from now on is you are the first person ever to compare Matt Keane to Ronald Reagan. Fantastic. Fantastic. That shows the dire strait of Australia.